Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar regarding Powerproject BIM. My name is Ben Taunt, and I'll be spending the next 30 minutes talking you through the introductory parts of this software solution. So in terms of our agendas today, after we've got our gentle introductions over and done with, I want to really start with outlining my view on what BIM means to our community. So that will be a definition of how we perceive BIM, and also what the benefits are of going down a 4D scheduling route. So I'll explain what we see as 4D scheduling and why you as organizations may wish to consider that as part of your planning process going forwards. And then I'll move on to doing an introductory demonstration of the software before having an opportunity to outline the next steps you might want to take as an organization and answer any questions that you may have. This is part one of a two-part webinar series. So today we're going to outline the basics, and there will be a little bit of a show and tell of the software, but we are just going to cover the core principles before in tomorrow's session, we're going to delve much more into the functional side of the software, play with a few more of the toys that are under the bonnet in the product, and really get to grips with the more complex parts of producing a 4D project plan. So you think if today's session's a bit basic for you, please do rejoin us tomorrow morning at 11 o'clock, so slightly earlier time tomorrow, 11 o'clock, and we'll cover those aspects. All our webinars are recorded, however, so if you missed that session, sign up for it anyway, and you'll get an email automatically with a recording of the webinar, in the same way as you'll also get a recording of today's webinar once it's been completed. A few housekeeping points. Everyone's microphones are muted, so if, like me, you're suffering a little bit from a cold, don't worry about it. We can't hear any background noise. It does mean if you want to communicate with me, the best way to do that is by typing a question into the GoToWebinar control panel, and that will pop up on my screen. I'm not brilliant at multitasking, so I might well pick those up at the end of the session. And if it's getting in the way of your screen, you can move it off to one side using the little orange arrow. But like I said, I want to start by outlining what is BIM. BIM means many things to many people, bit of a dirty word in some sectors. We've sort of moved on into talking more about digital construction. But building information modeling was really the starting point of this acronym that is BIM. Over the years, that sort of moved a little bit forwards from purely talking about the 3D model itself. So there was a period of time when we used to say, actually, BIM is much more about the building information management. It's about the management of all of the information that relates to the building. And by the way, that will be via a model as the conduit for passing that information across. But then even there was an argument about the use of the word building. It doesn't just relate to buildings. This can be any physical asset. I've even seen examples of this being used in the shipbuilding sector, where obviously it's not a building they're producing, and obviously it also affects civils, infrastructure, etc. So UK BIM Alliance now prefers to push out this idea of it being better information management as an acronym instead. But we are specifically today talking about 4D BIM, and the starting point of that is still the 3D model, like I said, being that conduit of flowing the information between the different design disciplines, the different disciplines within a process. I will today focus on the construction side of it. I will talk about models, about buildings and all the rest of it, but we do have other examples where we've got bridges, roads, railways, etc., modeled in this aspect. So for simplicity, I will talk about construction as well, but equally this process is just as applicable to demolition, remodeling, any sort of refurbishment. Again, it's about making sure we've got a 3D representation of the assets that we're working on. So that has to be produced somewhere else first before we get involved from a 4D perspective. And ideally, that should be shared in an open standard, what we refer to normally as an IFC file. Stands for Industry Foundation Class. It's actually an ISO standard. And it means that data can flow between different systems in an open industry standard, so you're not tied into a particular software vendor and their own proprietary formats. And there are different ways of constructing these models. So for example, you could have a complete model of every part of a build, what we call a federated model, or as I've got represented there in these three different snapshots, It could be 3 separate files being shared showing different disciplines, such as the structural and M&E stuff. In addition to that, there may be some extra elements that we want to visualize. So it could be the site layout or surrounding buildings, the existing building we're going to demolish first, temporary items as well to aid visualization. All of these 3D models need to be produced first before then the next part of the sequence gets involved. So moving on to that next part of the sequence, time is referred to as being the 4th dimension. So if we take a 3D model and we add an element of time data to it, that is then what was called a 4D planning environment. You'll all be familiar with the sort of videos I'm showing there on the right-hand side. You've seen these many times before, no doubt, but that is a 4D plan where we've taken a 3D model, we've combined it with information about when and the sequence of these items, and that then allows us to export into a 4D video showing the build over time. One side comment about GoToWebinar. Obviously, you're watching my demonstration over an internet connection. You're probably only getting a refresh of my screen about once or twice a second. So if any of the videos or even the live demo seems jerky today, please do bear in mind that's a cause of the internet connection. Videos and things like that run nice and smoothly on your local machine. It's not a performance issue with the software as such, it is because of the algorithms in the background. So 4D information, that sort of visualization of a build over time. Clearly, there's a bit of effort involved in producing one of those, and why should we invest that time? So what are the benefits of embracing a 4D approach? Well, as a starting point, it allows us to produce more rigorous and robust schedules. It allows us to analyze the feasibility of a schedule, make sure what we're planning on paper that isn't bonkers when it comes to the realities of the world. And that might mean showing up problems that weren't originally visible through a traditional schedule. Now, what do I mean by that? The simplistic example is, are we planning to construct the roof before we've finished completing the supporting beams that the roof is going to sit on? Okay, that might not be very realistic in the real world, but in a visualization, if we can see that that roof is being suspended in mid-air, then clearly we know that that plan is wrong. But it could also be about actually improving the flow of the build site. So it could be that we're improving the management of the resources and the space we have available to us. So for example, in my sequence, in my activities, am I planning to have lots of work happening in one small concentrated part of the building, potentially causing conflicts between the resources, the labor gangs that are going to be working together, and therefore leaving parts of the site redundant? Bit of a problem, may not know that originally. So by having that in a 3D environment and a 4D display, we can make sure we know where it is that we're working on and how we can better maximize our resources across the field. There's a few more points coming on screen there about potentially automating some of this in the future. So that can be, for example, extracting quantities information from the model. And if we can have access as the planning team to quantity data at a touch of a button, just by touching a part of the model and it giving me an instant readout of quantities and volumes, that can allow me to perhaps make some sort of assessment on the duration, the number of resources that I need to finish that activity. And again, but rather than having that in multiple spreadsheets or subsequent documents, by having that modeling data available to me, it can certainly speed up the process and can start actually to automate some of these schedule creation activities. And as the little videos always show, it's a much better communication tool. So we've got a better way of communicating with our clients, perhaps sitting down with subcontractors and showing them time slices of what they're working on at a given point in time, explaining the impact of delay. So using 4D to show the impact of delays and perhaps resequencing on the basis of the information we're seeing with each other, as well as clearly providing videos that are easier to understand for those of us who aren't planning experts. So there's some of the real benefits that come from producing a 4D environment. Now, as I mentioned, there are a number of steps that are required to get to that point. And the starting point is by using some sort of 4D software package to combine the model, like I've got there on the right-hand side, with the scheduling information, the activity list that's on the left there. And that's when we get involved. So as a recap, obviously quite a few of you on the session today are already Powerproject users. You probably know us from the core scheduling tool that sits within Powerproject, being a very powerful way of displaying and managing task data. But Powerproject in itself has a number of supporting modules. So for example, we've got a mobile phone tool that was completely rewritten and relaunched alongside the latest Powerproject 15 release to allow you to do even more stuff via mobile phone apps. We've also got a number of add-ons, including in 15 a schedule quality checker. They're free viewing tools for Powerproject. We can push out a load of management information that can be combined into dashboards. And one of the other modules, and obviously the subject of today's session, is the Powerproject BIM module that's available for the software. So what is the concept of Powerproject BIM? Well, we like to say that we are opening up the availability of 4D planning to our entire planning community. It's about making sure that the products are easy to understand and are affordable for the community. So by providing a bolt-on module for Powerproject, you're embedding into one product functionality which is familiar to individuals, so they know how to use it already, but adding that extra layer of information by bringing a 3D model into Powerproject, displaying it alongside your Gantt chart, and giving you familiar techniques to link those items up. So you're not having to relearn new products, but also importantly, it's all in one product. So you're not having to import and export data from different systems. As well as some of the more manual drag and drop aspects to Powerproject, we can also fire up some of the power of the software to help you with searching of data and bringing information across. The end game, therefore, being to be able to simulate the model over time. But Powerproject has got various different aspects in terms of time. Are we looking at our planned project dates by comparing to baseline? Are we looking at actual project dates once we've started to progress our plans? And are we doing some sort of an analysis between those different plans and actuals? And clearly, if you're running your project in Powerproject and it is an up-to-date project plan, your 4D sequence goes along with that. So we're now not just using 4D as an initial tool up front to produce some sort of glossy video for the marketing suite. We're actually using it to help us manage our projects in real time, looking out the window and comparing what I can see on site versus what my visualizations are telling me I should see. So that's all the principles of Powerproject BIM. Like I said, I'm going to now nip into a demonstration of these core principles that will then build on tomorrow when we go into the second part of the session. And to start with, I'm going to start a brand new project plan in the same way as you would do normally, but you'll note that I'm using a template there that was called a BIM template. If you don't already use customized templates in Powerproject, I do recommend you look at creating your own one or asking us to help you with that. And that then obviously allows you to get a quick start on several parts of your project plan. But once I've got a project open, the first aspect to it is to link in the model I want to work on. So I've got a long list of IFC files here. For the first part of this demo, I'm going to use a very simple small house. You'll have seen us use this lots and lots of times, but it gets us to grips with things nice and quickly. And Powerproject will now visualize that model and show it inside Powerproject. And there we go. I can do all the things you'd normally expect with a BIM viewer in terms of navigating through this model and being able to see it and play with it, etc., etc. But I can also click on items and look at the IFC properties of that. Now, anything that was configured during the export or during the modeling process will be available to Powerproject. So this list here is based on the amount of information that's actually in the model. But I've got a blank Gantt chart here, so if I wanted to link something up, if I click on that ground floor entry slab, I can hold down my control key and I can literally pick up that item, drop it on the Gantt chart, and it creates me a brand new task that links to that ground floor slab. I can do that with various other items, obviously. And these new tasks I've got here, if I click back through them, you'll see every time I click on a task, the part of the model it's linked to gets highlighted in orange. The default name for that task is going to be the same as the IFC name of that asset, but because this is a Power project, I can simply overtype this should I want to. I've also got a default duration. As a planner, I'm going to make some sort of better assessment of that. And obviously, you're then going to go in and link your tasks, etc. So there are 3 ways, in effect, of linking your tasks to your model, and that simple drag and drop is the first way of doing it. The second way is very similar in terms of if I already had a number of tasks, again, I can pick up assets and I can put them on my Gantt chart. I can pick something up and drop it on the chart. How do I know what I've linked up already? Now I've got an option here called the unscheduled product mode. And if I enable that mode, basically anything that I've already linked up disappears from screen. So if I link up that next bit of wall and I add it to the same task, it says, am I adding it to the same selection I've already made or am I overriding it? If I add it together, you'll see that that part of the wall disappears as well. So I can pick up an item, drop it on an activity, and you'll see it disappears from my model display. Now, the more things that I remove, you'll start to see some of the more complexities of this model. So for example, I've got all these different individual window frames, and I can actually press down the control key in multiple select items. So I could do that, but I could also hold down the shift key and I can draw a square box. And any asset that falls completely within that box will get selected. So I've got a multiple selection tool that I can use as well. But if I do have a large number of parts, and I'm going to use the example here of these roof beams, it can be quite difficult to multiple select them. I might actually click on the wrong thing by accident. So in that example, I'm going to ask the software to find for me all of the roof beams. And that's where the template really comes into play here, because I've already got a number of what are called IFC searches established. So an example of the level 3 beam, so I look at the properties of that search. There are some criteria here. It's looking for any IFC entity which is tagged as being a beam. It's also looking for a location tag, in this case not being equal to on level 2. And it has found 82 different parts of the model that meet that criteria, which I can select with the selection of one button. Now, clearly, if I was going to manually find 82 parts of the model, that would take me a very long time. So instead, I can ask the searches to do that for me. I can further refine that search. Let's say I'm only interested in the lumber beam, so I want the name to contain the word lumber. And if I save that, my product list is now going down to only 74 items, and the C channel beams are no longer selected. So my product searches can be defined once in a template and used over and over again as we go and use multiple projects. Really handy, particularly if all of your projects follow a certain framework. So for the sake of today's part of the demo, I'm going to select all of my searches and I'm going to create one activity for every single search. There we go. For the ease of time, I'm just going to link all those, finish to start and reschedule. And before you know it, I've got a fully linked bar chart where one activity represents nearly every part of my model. So now if I hit the play button on the BIM tab at the top there, I've got this red line sliding across the screen, and you'll see when we get to the tasks in question, the model gets visualized. Yes, this is a building, and yes, we are constructing it, but equally these activities could be tagged as being demolition tasks, and you could have parts of the model which are on screen from the very beginning, and then they disappear when the sequence relates to them in the model. So in a matter of seconds, because of having that structure already in place, I've created a fully linked bar chart, linked up to a model, and been able to produce a 4D output. Now, obviously, a lot of this has been simplified. So, for example, in this roof, that just arrived once on screen. Now, tomorrow I'm going to talk about something called a visualization template, so I can say that roof is going to be constructed from left to right. We'll talk about that in the session tomorrow. But in today's session, what I want to talk about is splitting things down. So when the IFC is given to us, the designer built that roof as just one asset. But if I want to split that up into smaller panels, let's say I'm going to be cutting it up and showing different parts, arriving at different parts of the project plan, I can actually use Powerproject to split that up into a checkerboard pattern. So in theory, I can now sequence each of these individual panels separately, should I want to. I can actually merge these together as well, so I can actually choose these individual panels and I can merge those together by hitting the merge option. And now I've created a skylight with a surround to it. Without having to go back to the modeler and ask them to make changes to the model, I've now got the ability to sequence these different parts of one asset at a different time. So that splitting tool I used just used a percentage-based cut. But there might be examples where you want to split based on where things intersect each other. So if I take the example of this walkway out here, if I want to split it where it intersects with that supporting beam underneath, in effect, I'd have to guess to try and work out where that split should occur. But instead, I've got the option in Powerproject to select that supporting beam, so I can split that walkway where it intersects with that roof beam. If I hit OK, you'll see the cut has occurred within that. So there I've got a cut based on where the different parts intersect. Really useful if your designer has put the lift shaft as one drawn asset from basement through into ceiling void, and actually we're going to do that over a sequence of different pours. I can split that where that intersects with each slab. And my last piece of splitting is going to be based on this side panel. I can actually just draw a simple line and say that I want to cut this based on where I've manually selected a drawing line. So I could split that on the diagonal. Or this is sort of a particularly standard type of drawing technology. I could actually create polygon shapes by clicking on the black line and adding in extra drawing points. So I can create a bit of a funky shape, and I can now, again, split that separately, draw it separately. So if I move on to one we prepared earlier, so here we have Powerproject BIM linked up to a project plan already. As I can see, as I run this scenario, the different parts are going in separately. So there's been some more intelligence in terms of how this plan has been put together. But for the sake of today's demonstration, I also want to highlight the fact that I can have a comparison model. And you'll see on my project plan, I have both live project dates, in this case, based on the code library represented in green to start with, but I've got a baseline as well shown in yellow. So in my settings, I can say the comparison window is going to link to the current baseline. If I start that sequence from scratch again, we now get to spot the difference. Where that red line is sliding across the screen, if I stop it there, according to my baseline, that is to say the yellow line will have completed all the pile caps, and in my bottom window, which is linked to the baseline, all the pile caps are in place, and we've started the rebar. But in the live date, that is to say this task here, you'll see we've still got some of the pile caps to complete and no rebar's gone in yet. So I've got a visual comparison of plan versus actual that I can then use as a communication tool to demonstrate where we've got to versus where we should be at any given point in time. So again, a much more powerful way of communicating this. Now there are techniques you can do in terms of filtering. So let's say I want to filter based on a code library, and let's say I want to filter based on just the columns and slabs. That produces a subset of my project plan. I can ask my BIM window to only reflect those tasks currently on show. So now I'm basically running a sequence purely based on my columns and slabs. So I've got a filtered version of my project plan and a filtered version of my 4D window. If I pause that at any given point, whenever I go to the File Print option, I can choose to, let's spin that around so it is shown landscape. I've got a filtered view, just my filtered tasks, and you'll see that actually in this printout, it also took into account where we were in the timeliner. So I've produced a view which is filtered based on the tasks that only are tagged as columns and slabs, but also this printout includes the 3D model of just those columns and slabs as of the sequence date we've gotten to in the timeliner. And that's the first way in which you might want to share this information with other users. We are going to do some more data sharing in tomorrow's session. But as we slide towards the top of the hour, the other way I want to talk about sharing this is by doing a file save as and saving it into a project viewer file, a PPV file. Now, if I save it into that format, lots of different things all get wrapped into one file. So it's going to save my project dates, my live project data you'll be familiar with from a PP file. It'll also embed the baseline. It'll also wrap up the IFC files. And it'll produce just one file that you can share with other users that are going to have all of those three components merged together. And they can open that up in the free viewer. And the free viewer now has the same BIM control window that I've got here in terms of the ability to run the timeliner. So now a fully licensed user of Powerproject BIM can share their BIM plan with someone who's only got the free viewer, and therefore make sure we're maximizing the benefits of 4D by sharing that with other users. Okay, that's the full state of what we're going to demonstrate today. Just to pick up a bit on the point about the viewer, if that's news to you, if you didn't know we had that, it is available for download from the website for free. If today's session was enough to whet your appetite, if you're already an existing user of Powerproject, the BIM functionality is built into the software, but you do need an extra license key from Elikasoft to enable you to access this functionality. We can unlock that for you remotely. If you are within the UK, obviously your dealings are direct with the vendor of the software, which is Elikasoft. You can procure the bolt-ons for the prices shown on the screen, so just under £700 to add BIM to your existing license, just over £1,000 to add it to a concurrent user license. On the point with concurrent, you don't need to upgrade every single concurrent user you've got on your network. You could have, for example, 3 licenses of Powerproject and buy one BIM module, and any one of those 3 licenses could in theory use the BIM module, but obviously one at a time. So you don't have to have a one-to-one mapping. You can just have the BIM, again, in the same sort of philosophy as a shared license. If you're listening to this webinar from outside of the UK and Ireland, then please do contact your local distributor, and they'll be able to provide you costs in your local currency, along obviously with all the information about how to get started using their expertise. And we do offer a free 14-day trial. If you've never used Powerproject before, if you download the trial from our website, it includes the BIM functionality as standard. If you're an existing Powerproject user, if you contact your vendor, Elikasoft, or one of our resellers, we can enable you the license remotely and basically just allow it to happen within your existing software without you having to upgrade anything else. And a quick point about services, we do offer obviously a training course to help you to use the software. You'll be familiar with this probably from the existing training you've done on Powerproject. It's a one-day course to upgrade your product knowledge, to enable you to understand, yes, some of the stuff I've covered today, but also the more complicated items we're going to get into in tomorrow's session. We can provide that at one of our own training centers, or we'll come to you and train up your users directly. And that's really the main points today. So if you've got any questions for me, do type them into the panel, and I'll pick those up in a moment. But just as a reminder, part 2 of this session is tomorrow morning at 11 a.m. and you can rejoin that webinar by signing up at legalsoft.com/events. And we're going to go into some more complex parts of this. So we're actually going to move models around. We're going to add in site objects like tower cranes, porter cabins, etc. We're going to talk about how we can improve the visualization aspects. We're going to be changing colors of stuff. We're going to be having things flash different colors when they're being constructed. And as I touched on earlier, we're going to have things being rendered from top to bottom. And then we're going to export into lots of different formats, including into videos as well. So that's the idea of tomorrow's session. And that's it for today. So thank you very much for your time.